Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show to talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Charmed. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, you have Harry and Mel trying to find the other half of the tablet, and it eventually leads them to a particular place, and upon arriving, they end up finding a witch being attacked named Kira, and she has this very specific wound, and so obviously she was saying it was a demon attack, so obviously Harry and Mel take her back to the command center, but no matter what they end up doing, nothing works. Harry's powers nor any of the potions Mel ends up coming up with are able to heal the wound, and obviously for them it's like, what does this even mean? What kind of wound would be like this that nothing they do can heal it? Because obviously it turns out Kira talks about the fact is that her people look after specific relics, and I was like, oh, okay. I figured obviously because this would have to have something to do with the stone tablets in that regard, but I guess they were just so busy trying to save her that didn't really come up in conversation earlier on. But I think that story ends up taking a really interesting development when we find out, because she says, oh, there's someone named Willow. It's a demon that attacked me, got a crow jacket and stuff like that. And obviously later on, Maggie and Macy show up and attack her. But it's like, oh, if she was a demon, why would she be relying on traps? But it's obviously she is magical, so... But... I guess, well, they're in a very unique position, I guess. Because in my head, I'm like, yeah, but she's also a witch, too, so why didn't... Because we ended up finding out she was a witch, and I was like, oh. My first thought was like, wait, is Kira a liar? Is she not actually a witch? Is she actually a demon or something? And they just assumed she was a witch. I wasn't sure. I was like, what was up with that? Turns out Kira's actually a witch as well. We'll get to that in a second. But the whole thing was in my head. I was thinking, oh, why isn't she, But I was like, right. The charm ones are a very rare breed of witches that can just have magic, not just, they naturally have their abilities, which not every other witch has straight up magic they could use like that. A lot of witches would have to use incantations and spells, so on the moment they don't have battle ready magic like the Charmers do, because the Charmers had not only the power of 3 naturally on hand, but also abilities that so I guess just because I just assume every witch is kind of like the Charm ones, but obviously that's what makes the Charm ones stand out, because they have magic at the battle ready at any point in time just because of their natural abilities as the Charm ones. So that kind of, but regardless, that was just something I had to get straight in my head thinking about that. But I thought what's interesting when it turns out, like I said, they're both witches. It turns out Kira and Willow are kind of from the same ancestral group of witches, but at some point in time, their ancestors split apart. Basically, Kira belongs to a group that kind of moved away. I guess they're kind of Willow's people kind of stayed to the woods and everything, whereas Kira's people kind of moved to the city, and that basically they've kind of been warring sides over the traditions and everything that they look over. So Kira kind of manipulated them under the circumstances, and it's for them it's super effed up what you did. We could have hurt another witch. You also used the word, it's oh, you yelled demon. It's kind of essentially they were making an equivalency to yelling fire in the theater. It's you were telling us demon so that we'd kind of jump on and attack. It's you can't do that, But it's also the moment she found out they were the Charm ones and everything. It's she was apologetic about it, but at the end of the day, you're like, man, that's actually super messed up. But it turns out the reason why she did all that is because she wanted access to the relics in the first place. And it turns out, more so because her mom had died recently, and she wanted to bury her mom with their ancestors. Well, her family and her ancestors. But obviously there was still the bad blood between the warring groups. And obviously, upon hearing what Kira had gone through recently, Willow was like, I'm sorry. So it's fine, I will give you the runes necessary to kind of give your mom a proper burial with the ancestors on one condition: we end this feud. So they were able to kind of end this, essentially family feud that's been going on for generations. it's just sad that things kind of had come down to this. And sadly, like, everyone had kind of come into this with their own issues. Like, Macy kind of had some issues, which we'll get to her side of things. And then she was kind of bringing into the situation of like, wait, demons were responsible for this. Mel, this is because you appease, Abigail every time she has her way and does what she wants to. Once again, Macy and Mel have been the biggest anti Abby people. But, Mel is kind of, I think, eased up at least a little bit more on her compared to, like, maybe May. But it's also, like, Macy went through something, messed up that day. And I think that's what also, like, triggered her to just kind of want to lash out at kind of everybody, but more so in particular about Abby. And just, like, she kind of needed something to fight. There was even this moment that Kira said this line of, like, have you never felt, you guys are the Charmers, you never felt powerless. Which I'm like, rewind the time to season 2 where they were literally without their powers. Yeah. So that just, but I guess it's like, even without powers, they're still the charm ones, but still that's a whole semantics in the situation within. But I just thought that was so fascinating. But, because it's like, yeah, they actually do know, but obviously it kind of coincides with a little bit with, what Macy was going through this episode. But, because obviously there's so, like, many moving, pieces at play here, like, Mel kind of, like, got frustrated. She was listening to what Macy had said earlier, and it's like, right, I'm going to get answers from Abigail, which she goes to go to Abigail, which Abigail was in a process of trying to deep fry Jordan, because she wanted Jordan to kind of do what she wanted to, because she had manipulated the whole situation going through the law firm that he works at, or at least he's interning at. I initially thought, like, the moment he's like, is this the place? I was like, oh, did someone manipulate you? I was like, who is it? Who is it to ask for you specific? At first I was thinking, like, oh, is it going to be Abigail's sister or her mom or something like that? But it's like, no, it ended up being Abigail herself, because for her, it's like, she wants answers. It's like, oh, you haven't told me everything there is to know about your experience with my sister. It's like, I told you everything that went down. Like, why would I lie about anything like that? But for her, it's because she can't control her demon side. She believes her sister cursed her, and so she wants to do a demon mind meld with Jordan and get those answers, but he's kind of reluctant about it, because it's like, yeah, you manipulated me to get here, just sign the papers. And she's like, I will, but also you're not leaving until I get some answers. Luckily, Mel shows up and just kind of, like, confronts her, because it's like, oh, at the time still thinks it's a demon attack. Harry comes to correct her, like, oh, it wasn't a demon attack, there was another witch. It's like, well, you should, and Abigail's like, well, now you should apologize because I'm innocent. You were literally attacking Jordan when I got here. And obviously because Mel, like I said, had eased up on how she views Abigail, she was almost thinking, like, she still wanted to believe that there was some redeeming part of Abigail, but it's like, no, in her mind, it's like, you're irredeemable, and just kind of bounces. And obviously Jordan decided to say, because for him, it's like, well, we still got some stuff to negotiate, because he kind of needs to leave with that paper signed and everything, so he can't just kind of leave right now. And obviously it's like, did you hear what she said? She has the nerve to call me irredeemable. And Jordan's like, where's the lie in that? Like, the fact of the matter is doing what you do, like using your, the way you go about, like, the fact of the matter is you were threatening me. You were forcing me to stay here. You kind of, like, you're very manipulative to get what you want. And, it's like making her realize, like, that basically, obviously, you don't need to go about things the way she does, It's kind of completely unnecessary, but I guess it's a byproduct of, like, her upbringing, where you have to kind of fight tooth and nail, especially in her circumstances, being half witch, half demon, never being accepted by either group, kind of having a complicated family that you have, whatever your circumstances are with your mom and your sister, plus, yes, you said you never really cared about your dad's opinion, but on some level you had to, and that's why you're still grabbing for power, because you're trying to fill this void inside of herself. She uses the demon mind meld on Jordan and finds out, wait, my sister didn't curse that totem. I'm actually voluntarily doing this myself. Like, my demon, like, she's so, like, she's doing it to herself. Like, she has such disdain for herself that her demon side's acting on that subconsciously and trying to kill her, which, you know, it's Jordan's actually like, you're these two sides of you are literally at war with each other over your soul. And that's a hard pill to swallow, where it's just kind of like, oh, like, because it would be so much simpler if it was like, oh, someone did this to me, but it's like, no, you're legitimately doing it to yourself. And I think this is a rude awakening that Abby needed to kind of make her see things differently, to see that the way she's going about things until now, because her whole thing has always been about manipulation and forcing people, saying like, we've seen that she's capable of being good. Yeah, she might need some persuasion, she might try, but it's still the thing of, even when she tries to do good, it's kind of like a pro quo type of situation, where it's like, I got to get something out of it too. But it's also like, you know, she can be good, she just kind of gives into her demons a lot more than she should. And obviously she's like, do you agree with Mel, am I irredeemable? And it's like, redemption is kind of, you know, Jordan's like, redemption is something you kind of strive for, like, every day. You try to, you know, do it one day at a time, you know, making you take it, you know, because he understands better than anyone. He's like, I've had to face my own inner demons since coming back from Afghanistan. It's like, well, how do you do that, you know? How do you survive not being consumed by them? And it's like, you repent, you know? So it's definitely going to be interesting to see what this means going forward. Now, like, I'm curious if it's going to lead in some shape or form to her kind of making amends with her sister, like that side. I don't know. I mean, to be fair, her sister wants nothing to do with her, but I'm curious, will this kind of change things? So, like, what this means for Abby going forward. Will she be as, you know, ruling with an iron fist? Will she be as cruel going forward as she's kind of been with the demon world? Granted, the demon world is a world of, like, you kind of have to rule by cruelty, because being soft-hearted is seen as weakness. So growing up in that environment, you know, but it's like she kind of willingly chooses to be a part of that, because for her it's like, if I don't take this by force and rule with an iron fist, like, I won't have any place in the world to be accepted. It's like, you would, but I think for her, she's just so blinded that by all of this, the power and, you know, wanting to find a place of her own, that she's not seeing kind of what's in front of her. Like, obviously the charm ones can be both friends and allies in many different regards. I mean, hell, you have a kindred spirit in, you know, Macy, and obviously they have their, like, back and forth, just, you know, on personal levels that include Harry, but on, you know, just who Abby is personality wise and everything, and just like her grab for power and stuff. Like, but you have a kindred spirit in Macy who's like part demon as well. So it's like, if you just kind of put a lot of your stuff aside, like, you two could have a lot of common ground. And obviously I think the charm ones would be a lot more willing and open armed to, like, welcome you in just as a friend and ally if she wasn't so conniving sometimes, you know? So, like I said, it's just going to be interesting to see where things kind of go on that front. But let's talk about the Macy side of things. Because I thought that was interesting, like, when we got the introduction, she meets Ariel, and they're kind of hitting it off, and it's like, oh, yeah, you're a part of this? Oh, that's cool, dope. And the whole elevator thing, it's like, oh, man, that's awesome. And then we hard cut to, like, and the coloration or saturation, I think coloration is probably the right word, for the scene kind of changed, and it's like Macy with, like, I think her mascara kind of running and being escorted off the elevator. And I was like, oh, I was under the assumption, like, oh, that's super far in the future, like, oh, here's stuff at safe space, and then hard cut to, like, maybe a couple months from now and things aren't working well. I thought that's where we were going. I didn't realize, it's not until the episode progressed, I was like, oh, that's all from the same day. But she ends up meeting Lori, which, interestingly enough, I know her best from Leverage. I've seen her in other things, but Leverage is the first thing that comes to my mind. She played the actress who plays Lori, she played Nate's ex-wife in Leverage. Regardless. She, you know, it was a little interesting, that first meeting with me. She's like, oh, look at your beautiful skin, and touches her hair, and it's like, oh, what's that about? And it's like, I was like, okay, that's weird. Just walking up, touching people's face, and just like, oh, it's like, okay. Because also saying, like, it was a photo shoot and stuff like that for, like, the malaria campaign. It's like, Macy's just like, okay, I just want to talk about ideas, but yeah, sure, I know a lot about malaria as well. And it's like, also like, oh, here's some outfits. And Ariel's like, oh, how do you feel in that? It's like, Macy's like, I don't really feel it. And it's like, all right. Ariel finds her a different outfit. It's like, oh, this is more comfortable. Lori didn't appreciate that because it's like, oh, if you're gonna change something, you should come to me first. I was like, okay, so she's power tripping. Okay. And then we get the next stage of it when we find out, like, oh, she set up this whole thing. It's supposed to be like a picture with African children and people, and Macy's supposed to be out front just for this photo shoot. And it's like, oh, like, get ready for like the hero pose or some shit like that. And it's like, oh, right. So this is some, as Macy kind of says it, like some fake woke thing of like, oh, you're just trying to like, oh, you need someone of, because she brought up a point of Macy's skin, because it's like, right, that's a debate, I think, that can be a line that can be drawn as well, like the colorism in that situation, because it's like, oh, I have a lighter complexion, so I'm a lot, it's a lot more appealing from, a PR standpoint or something like that, because Macy's like, I just came here to share my ideas, not to be kind of like essentially being used as a prop. It's like, oh, you need a quote unquote safe black person to kind of fit this narrative that you're trying to create. And Lori kind of goes like, oh, I don't like your tone, blah, 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 blah. And she's like, oh, and you're threatening me. And she's like, be careful, I'm going to call security on you. And Macy's did nothing to her. And it's like, she's like, are you serious, lady? And ends up being escorted out by security. And I think for Macy, it was like humiliating, because not realize, like, because for her it made her feel powerless, because it's like that something like that would happen. It's just like, and Maggie says it best, like, wow, she went to nice to Karen in like zero. Well, I think it was like 0 to Karen in like 60 seconds, huh? Or something of that nature. And it's like, man, that sucks, because it just makes you feel humiliated that, like, once again, you're just seen as kind of like this prop, and then kind of made out to be, for her, it's like belittled, kind of just fit to be like this stereotype, because she was saying like, yeah, you're trying to make it seem like this is just an African thing. Like, malaria hits all over the place, hits different groups of people, rich and poor, and it's like you're just focusing on this particular avenue of it. If it was like a multicultural group of people, sure, but you specifically chose African and you chose someone black to kind of, the optics, but it turns out, because of Julian's death, the Shea Company's kind of taken a hit, and so the board, or I think it's, or it might just specifically be the Safe Space board, bought on Lori to kind of like fix their perception, just because they're trying to like potentially sell off Safe Space, which obviously Macy's like, I'm not going to let someone like Lori or the board, because she was like, because if you had a multicultural, like, board membership, you would realize how stupid and how much of a terrible idea this right here was, this quote-unquote PR move. And it's like, oh, the board is kind of fun, so it's kind of like, okay. And I'm assuming we might see more of Macy and Lori butting heads in the future. Maybe not, I don't know, because Ariel came to talk to her and kind of explain like what's kind of happening at Safe Space and what Lori's part to play in all of this was. It's not like she's a more recent person brought on to kind of fix things. I just thought that was kind of, sad. It's like, Jesus, because I guess it's something that, I guess Macy kind of considering the company and stuff like that, I think it was a thing of like, oh, you wouldn't expect like something like that. You'd expect there to be a lot more progressive people to kind of know that, oh, that's a terrible idea. Like that, the fact is, it's not like, oh, Lori just did that willy-nilly. It's like, no, the board signed off on it. She was like, oh, the board said this was okay, and I was like, the fact is they said that was okay is the problem, so I wasn't expecting that kind of, I didn't know where that storyline was going to go. Didn't really necessarily initially think it was going there in that regard. That was interesting. So, but obviously there is some silver lining to it, because obviously, it's sadly that Macy had to say that line of like, when she was younger, her mom had told her like, women that look like us can't fly off the handle. It's a very like, it's something that kind of gets brought up in the boys, because it's like, oh, like, I'm a different ethnicity. Like, I don't have the privilege of a white person to just be able to fly off the handle with no major repercussions. Macy didn't even do anything. She didn't, like, get aggressive or anything. And the lady had the security called on her, like, oh, she's being uncontrollable and stuff like that, having her escorted out there like she's, like, attacking her, being blah, 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 blah. Like, plenty of witnesses there to know that that wasn't the case. She was just calling Lori out for her BS, but still. But the interesting thing is that same talk, both Mel and Maggie also had it as well. So it's like, oh, so there is still kind of like, we might have had our circumstances, but, you know, we still all kind of got the same speech from Mom, that we did have like a childhood connection regardless of everything. So I thought that was it. Like I said, there was at least some silver lining of, like, at the end of the day, they're not going to let someone like Lori stop them, that they're going to, you know, keep working forward and moving forward with it. So I thought that was a pretty dope aspect to it. So, and then finally we had the end of the episode where we have both sides of the tablet coming together, because I don't think I even talked about it at all, that they ended up finally finding the tablet because there was like a cave of ancients that they went to that Willow showed them, and they found the other half of the tablet. So maybe now they can get some answers of understanding who built that the Tomb of Chaos, and for what purpose, and what this all has to do with the allergy that the Charmed Ones had. So hopefully we get some more answers to all of this next episode. I'm really curious to see where ultimately this all ends up taking us. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.